How can you turn vintage speakers into high-end ones with minimal investment? Getting a high-end speaker set up for around €1,000 is very challenging. However, even when buying used equipment, there is a solution. You can find high-quality vintage speakers from the 80s and 90s with good bass, and you can upgrade the average tweeter. This upgrade is aimed at achieving the widest possible dynamic range, known as the detail of neutral sounds. I managed to buy excellent speakers, mid-range and high-range for €100 at the store, which means 2 of them cost €200. Next, I need a decent old speaker for the upgrade. I estimate this at $500. We can find one through local advertising portals and listings. Consider investing more to upgrade the crossover. I suggest securing at least €200. What's the alternative? A 6-channel amp system with active crossover. If you allocate the budget correctly, the active crossover is included in the cost of the speaker, and the amplifier system is included in the cost of the amplifier. So, what's the budget? I would say that in total, from €1,000 to €1,600, we can put together a very good active system. Here's a practical example of restoring vintage speakers, or how to make a top-notch system using a vintage speaker. The old speakers I chose were made in 1984 in the Czech Republic by the company Tesla. I have a personal story about these speakers. During my university years, I interned at state television while the studio was being renovated, and they were going to dispose of these decommissioned speakers. I asked his boss if I could take them, and he agreed. The tweeter was damaged, but everything else worked. I got married, had my first child, and lived with my wife in a small apartment. Independence arrived as we expected our second child. The poor 90s, we listened to music and were happy. Times have changed. I started climbing the career ladder, got jobs at major international companies like Microsoft and Samsung Electronics, and later worked in the electronics industry as well. Life was getting better. We moved to a more spacious apartment, and during this stressful period in my life, I sold all my musical equipment except for these speakers. I developed an emotional attachment to them, and now it's time to give them a second life and turn these speakers into an active system. I will use the concept that I explained in my videos, and I will make this speaker completely passive. It won't even have a crossover. And I route all the outputs through the speaker and then connect 6 amplifiers, and the active crossovers are placed in front of it. Let's see if I can make a really good speaker. Some features of this speaker are that it's a sealed box, relatively large, but a sealed speaker. There's a 12-inch good woofer and a 4-inch mid-range driver, and also a 16-ohm tweeter, which once burned out, and I replaced it with an 8-ohm tweeter and made some adjustments. If you compare the speakers that were designed and produced in 1984 and the modern ones, the key differences are the mid-range and the tweeter. Because today we have ultra-precise chip machines, temperature-resistant enameled wires, well, about 200 degrees and above. New materials for membrane loudspeakers appeared, like various multi-layer types. Products like sandwiches, which also work very well. And also, for a relatively low price, €50 per loudspeaker, we can replace the mid and high frequency loudspeaker. For the project I chose, the tweeter is SB Acoustics. Here is the nomenclature. Let's see what it looks like. Well, good packaging. Something for moisture. Okay, we throw this away. Well, that's how it looks, a protective cap. Let's take it off. Well, it's small in size, it's easy to integrate it there. Of course, you need an adapter. For mid-range, I chose the MSH 116 4-ohm. It's a specialized loudspeaker for mid-frequencies. Well, let's see what's inside. Let's open the package. Why did I choose this particular loudspeaker? It has some features, it measures very well, it was measured in a reputable magazine, and basically I believe that everything is fine with it. It showed excellent characteristics. It was designed as a mid-range loudspeaker, German quality. The Germans, as always, approach everything properly. They think about the details, and even small things like this little washer are included. I don't need to look for any other isolating materials. This speaker has a very thin basket, which makes it easy to integrate. You don't need to make special grooves and so on. It's about 1 millimeter there. In many cases, that's quite convenient. Besides that, it's purely a mid-range. It has a so-called underhang coil, which means the coil is smaller than the magnet. And I'm going to use it as a mid-range driver and replace that old speaker that was in this cabinet. The resonance frequency of this speaker is 100 Hertz, and I'm going to cut it somewhere at 300 or above 300. Of course, we need an adapter to connect it to the place where the previous speaker was. It has such a strange design, but here is my adapter. 2 times 2 millimeter aluminum, that's 4 millimeters, that's more than enough. Everything will work. I made it specifically for this speaker, so it would be easy to replace the previous loudspeaker. For the tweeter, I made an adapter out of wood. The idea is that I'll fix it there permanently for the future and only replace this small part. Tweeter, this is roughly how it looks. I made everything on a computer numerical control machine. It's so precise and accurate. And of course I'll use sealant so that nothing leaks, and I'll tighten it really well. Overall, all the modifications are quite simple, and they don't take much time. Well, of course, it takes time to figure out how to solve it in the simplest way, but this is my solution in the simplest way. Alright, let's move on to disassembling the speaker, see what's inside, take apart all the drivers, and start the modification. Well, let's unscrew all the old stuff and see how we can use it. As you can see, I sealed it with sealant to prevent air leaks. I did this about, I doubt to say, 30 years ago. Yeah, there are some strange Polish speakers here that I used to replace the original ones. But in general, they worked. By today's standards, of course, it's nothing, but back then it was pretty good, better than Soviet speakers. Well, this is what the device for the tweeter looks like. And in general, I got it right. Everything is correct. Well, of course, I measured it before recording to make things faster. I know it fits. Let's take it apart. The mid-range speaker is very strange. In my opinion, it's a very strange speaker. It also has a certain kind of protection so that no one pokes it with their finger accidentally. And let's take it apart to see how it all looks. Well, everything is done properly. As you can see, the mid-range compartment is separated from the main compartment, so the woofer doesn't affect it at all. Well, let's take everything apart here. I'll be using the same protective basket. But the speaker itself has no value. It's outdated. It's very specific, very stiff, very harsh, and doesn't meet modern standards at all. But as you can see, it's made quite neatly and skillfully. This is a professional speaker. This is a professional speaker for studios. Well, not for recording, I would say. It's some kind of reference speaker. It's not for studios as a reference monitor. No, it's more for sound reinforcement, like adding music and so on. Yes, it's a very specific loudspeaker. I haven't seen ones like this. You see how stiff the suspension is. Its frequency response is kind of peaky. It can actually shout at mid-frequencies. But this is old stuff. It's not suitable for modern acoustics. Now we have much better mid-range loudspeakers, and I'm going to replace them and throw this one away. I don't see any use for it in the future. It's all just old stuff, old stuff, old stuff. It's going to end up in the trash bin. What about the bass player? Let's try to unscrew it. I'm curious how hard it will be to take it out. It might even be glued in. Well, let's see. Now somehow I have to take it out. Oh, that was easier than I thought. Yeah, it was easier than expected. Well, you see, it's a serious loudspeaker, massive, with a solid cast body. It's pretty heavy. Well, it's a beast, a real beast. So, what does it say here? It says Tesla, even hi-fi. Look at these terms. Oh, well, hi-fi was a standard. Yeah, hi-fi was a standard. Cast body. Not stamped, big magnet. Very big for that time. Well, overall, I would say that this bass speaker is good. Well, today it would cost, well, a bass speaker of this type, it's hard to say, 100 or 2, somewhere around there. Well, at least 1,500 for sure. And most importantly, when we choose an old speaker, we look at the bass speaker to make sure the rubber isn't cracked, to make sure everything is fine. That's the main thing. Since we replaced the mid-range and tweeter anyway, it doesn't matter if someone poked it. Well, as for the damping here, I don't know what material it is or what's inside. It's pretty powerful. Crossover. These lows use transformer-type chokes, while the highs use air core. Overall, it's performed well. Here we have an inductor for the low-pass filter. Well, it looks like a transformer, but it's actually an inductor, not a transformer. Who knows what material is used there? I have no idea. But overall, the filter is good since it has almost no resistors. A resistor is a bad component for filters. The tweeter is also well made. It has a paper capacitor, and there's an additional smaller capacitor so that the highs pass through well, and all these coils are air core. But probably, even by modern standards, the crossover is above average. Everything is done properly. There are no specific mistakes or any complaints here. Yeah. So what's next? Actually, making a crossover like this is quite difficult. What I like is how these coils are attached here. They can vibrate from the high pressure. But I'm not that much of an expert, so I don't know if it really matters or not. If the air coil vibrates a little under the air, does anything change or not? I think nothing really changes. You see, these two capacitors that are parallel to the paper capacitor in the high-frequency circuit, that's also done properly. That's exactly how it should be done, so that the highest oscillations have less internal inductance in these capacitors. Let's take a closer look at the case itself, but overall there are no special reinforcements here except for the plate on the back panel directly in the middle, so it doesn't vibrate there. That's all. Many will say that this is a bad case because it doesn't have various additional reinforcements. But let's listen. In general, this speaker was clearly developed and made by smart people, believe me. Tesla was a strong company in acoustics and sound equipment during the Soviet era. So what they came up with is made well, but let's listen. We'll do some measurements later. But as you can see, nobody really bothered about anything. But maybe that's actually the right approach. But just imagine, this is professional equipment for audio recording, for recording studios. And the manufacturer is also a professional. Czech Tesla is a professional, and they supplied equipment all over the Soviet Union, different level consoles, other audio equipment, and they worked reliably. Now I'm going to do some boring work, wiring, soldering, twisting with this protective plastic casing. And let's assemble the speaker. As you can see, I'm using relatively thin wires here, about half a square millimeter, but it's a short distance and low power for the tweeter and mid-range, and thicker wires for the woofer. But here we'll insert and assemble it. This is how it looks. I won't be using any finger-thick wires here. It doesn't make sense. Absolutely no point in doing that. If you looked at the original design, there were also half-millimeter wires inside the speaker. Many enthusiasts, or whatever you want to call them, these so-called specialists, will immediately say, how can you use such thin wires in a crossover? But guys, do the math, yeah. The length of the copper wire and the internal resistance, the resistance of the speaker, everything is done correctly there. You don't need very thick wires here. Also remember, when we connect directly to the speaker, we have a very simple load. Well, practically there. If it's 4 ohms, then it's from 4 to 6 in that passband, which we separate with filters for the amplifier. But if it's 8 ohms, then it's from 8 to 12. It's very linear, there are no peaks or dips and no other problems. So we fasten it with regular wooden screws and it will all hold firmly. My whole design is actually well thought out. This is just an improvement, a simple improvement. But yes, there was a time when I was figuring things out and came up with how to make all these adapters. Alright, let's install the woofer now. Here I replaced the seal. I took it from a plastic window frame, and it's a really good insulation system. If you screw it in, it will be completely airtight. And for speakers without a bass reflex, it makes sense. It makes sense. It's important. I'll use the same screws with these and tighten these old screws from the 80s. It's hard to find the same length and the same type, so here the original parts remain. The same goes for my modification. Overall, everything is being modified smoothly. I think Murphy is lurking. Things are going too smoothly. We've adjusted everything. Very good. Everything is sealed. Yes? So now we need to connect this wire to my special connector. See, this one, an 8-pin speak-on, and I will use this 8-pin speak-on in my projects. They're easy to modify because I just replaced the back panel with those same holes and it all works out simply. But here, to make everything easier to assemble, I labeled it the tweeter and the mid-range, since they have the same wires for the future. It will be hard to tell them apart. And here everything is properly fastened with this blade-type connector. Yes. Actually, I celebrated too soon. Suddenly I realized that I had installed only one damping material, but there are supposed to be 2. So I have to take this speaker apart again. I need to take apart the woofer and put in what I forgot, but it's not that bad. Just a little time. Yeah, we opened it. You see, there's one here, but there should be 2. This is the second one. We put the second one in. It should be in there like this. I'm securing all the loudspeakers now, and we're getting close to the completion of the project. It's impossible to over-tighten the bolts here. There are some metal ones there. Special fasteners, it's not attached to the wood. Also, another small but important thing, they installed metal threads in the wood. It also increases durability. Well, we still have to install it there. the rear connector. Well, this is how it looks now. There aren't any big differences, but as you can see, we can even see these aluminum parts. I even chose not to paint it. I'm worried I'll mess it up, so let's leave it as is. But overall, we improved the speaker. You see, there's a connector here. I just replaced the plate with another one, even kept the same holes. I picked it out, measured, selected, and made it on the machine. I cut this aluminum profile, that's all. Well, let's measure. Let's take a few measurements. So what do I have here? I have a measuring microphone, an inexpensive one, but it's a specialized one. And here is our system, an active crossover with lots of buttons and a 6-channel amplifier system. I also have professional headphones, which I'll be using to listen. I'll listen to music isolating myself from the room, and then I'll adjust the crossover so it sounds the same as in the headphones, so that the whole room is balanced in tone and sounds just like it would without the room. Well, my room isn't treated much. I used to record training videos for third-party companies in this room too. I had a small business like that. I used it as a studio, but it's only treated for voice. Yeah, the lows aren't treated at all. All right, our speaker. Well, I placed it on a stand so it's at ear level since I'll be listening to them while sitting. And we need to take key measurements. I use the computer program Arta. It's free up to a certain level. If you don't need to combine several measurements into one graph, which is for low frequencies, then I can do such basic measurements with the free version. Well, there are other programs too. They all work pretty much the same way. My room is small, about 3 by 7, well, basically 20 square meters. And let's take the key measurements. The internet is full of tutorial videos on how to take and do acoustic measurements. I won't go into detail here at all. I especially won't explain what or how I'm measuring. We'll just look at the characteristics. This is the amplitude frequency response. And overall, in this room, we can consider that it's showing more or less correctly from about 300 to 400 Hertz. But as you can see, overall the linearity is quite good. Among these new loudspeakers, this old speaker performs at the level of the very best. If you draw an average line, I would say it's plus or minus 2 decibels that I got. There's a slight dip, but it's a small dip. You really won't hear it. I would say the result is amazing. The result is amazing. Well, here I worked a bit with the crossover frequency, and I found that if I raise the crossover frequency to about 3.5 or 4, I get a slight dip. It's better to cut somewhere at 2.5 kilohertz, and then I get the best response. Mine is powerful and good. A high-frequency speaker, and in general, it will work better at 2 kilohertz than a mid-frequency one. And since active filters cut at 24 decibels per octave, I have a wider range where I can cut these ranges. I tried different ones, but honestly I tried them and I didn't hear any difference at all. The difference here is about, well, maybe a decibel. In an untreated room like mine, you can't hear anything, no difference at all. But I set up what was the very best, and overall I'm satisfied. Don't pay attention to the lower range in a small room. It's impossible to measure everything that way. You need a different method, like the one we use. But the most important thing is where to place it. And since I have a speaker, it's a closed-type speaker. Its response drops at the low end, and I can put them in the corner. They won't boom there. But I can even play down to 20 Hertz, and the difference in volume is about 3 times. Then, when I finish the measurement, I'll also listen to the room and play around with the range gain. That means low frequency and high frequency, and I'll achieve a neutral sound. According to the headphones which isolate from the room, I want the room with all its reflections to give me the same tonal balance as if I were isolated from the room. Actually, that's the correct tuning method. But what else? Let's look at the impulse characteristics. In this setup, my speakers don't have phase adjustment. See, here is the step response. First the tweeter shows up, then the mid-range, then the woofer with a delay. How critical is that? Well, in a small room like mine where the ceiling is close, the floor is close, and everything else is close, there's no point in working on phase characteristics here. Even if I get the direct sound right, for example, the reflections will still be like this. It'll be a complete mess. A complete mess. So, I think it only makes sense to adjust phase characteristics in a treated room, especially in heavily treated room. How much better everything sounds there if the phase characteristics are correct. I'm not a specialist of that caliber. You need to talk to those who have both anechoic and treated rooms and so on. Basically, I'm satisfied with a speaker like this with a non-phase linear characteristic. It's already very high quality. If you want a phase linear one, you can make it with a digital crossover. There are modern professional and amateur digital crossovers that allow you to make filters without phase distortion to do it there. Speaker delay and so on. You can do many things and get a perfect phase response. How much better will it be? Well, honestly, I can't really say talk to a professional. Maybe someone in the comments will say how big the difference is. If you look at the literature, it's unclear. Some say there's no difference, some say there's a big difference. Since you can't listen for yourself or do all the experiments, well, I'm not a specialist. I don't have a room where I could listen to all of this. But overall, everything is fine in all respects. This speaker shows good qualities, really good qualities. And all the modification was that I replaced 2 speakers with modern ones but matched. Yes, they are matched, and as you can see, well, overall everything is good. Yes, phase linearity remains a mystery to me. I would gladly participate in an experiment where you listen to one and then the other. There are also a few more characteristics here, like bed's decay and cabinet resonance. And since everything there is more or less the same, it means there aren't any major flaws either. Overall, this speaker is fine. Yeah, it's old stuff. I got it for free, added a few speakers there. Turned it into an active system, which probably makes sense. It makes sense. I don't have any comments either about whether the case is good or not, but if you come up and tap it, it's not completely dead sounding. But when I listen, I have no complaints at all. Maybe it's because I have complaints about the room. But overall, it's a very good speaker. But if you, I don't know, evaluate the video like this, check if there are no extra ribs inside the case, then that's the solution. Or maybe later there's some bad word. The measurement shows that it's quite a tolerable speaker, quite a good speaker. In general, I set up both speakers and then with headphones I adjusted it to sound neutral in the room. The only place I had to put them was in the corner. But because it's a sealed box, the lows drop off linearly and for a long time. You know, I didn't get that special bass boost. It was pretty balanced, and I just adjusted a few knobs and achieved almost the same tonal balance as with headphones. And then I just listen to music. And it's easy to listen to, you don't get tired, it's very pleasant, clear mid-range frequencies. The bass isn't intrusive, but it's clear, like boom, tick, tick, it's there, and it sounds great. Overall, in my opinion, it sounds like a very, very expensive speaker. The total investment, well, for a project like this, considering that I got the speaker for free. So 200 euros for the speakers. These are good speakers. And about 800 euros for the electronics. If you get the very, very best electronics, then it's 1500, 1600, but for me it was enough. 800 euros. In general here, when you have a multi-way system, it's not necessary to use the very best amplifiers. Any amplifier works fine there. We can use simpler amplifiers. There are plenty of old speakers on the market. The time for the project is 1 week. If you want the best system in the world, we make it ourselves.